does my 96 Viper GTS Coupe compare with my 2012 458 Italia? They really don't compare. I mean, they're very different. They do things very differently. But since you guys have been asking about it, let's go ahead and dive into it. So of course, we're gonna start off with just the numbers. And when you look at things, the Viper, of course, is from 1996 and has a naturally aspirated V10 that is 8-liter displacement, and it was factory rated 450 horsepower and 490 foot-pounds of torque. Now, of course, mine has been modified a decent amount, and so those numbers are actually probably closer in line with what the Ferrari has. A naturally aspirated V8 that's only 4.5-liter displacement, but makes 562 horsepower and 390 foot-pounds of torque. And so right off the bat, you can see that with the newer technology, you get definitely more horsepower, but it also has less torque. So this has a huge amount of torque out of the gate. I mean, even at like idle, you're at like 300 foot-pounds of torque, where this one peaks out at 390 foot-pounds of torque. So there's a huge difference there in just how the cars are gonna behave. And so as a result, the Viper is really so much like a sledgehammer, and the Ferrari is like a precision instrument. And so they're very different in that regards. And because of that, they drive very differently. I mean, it's really not a fair comparison between the two. But now if you're looking at your performance numbers, I mean, your 0 to 60 times, the Viper was rated at 4 seconds, but this one being modified is probably closer to 3.5 seconds, where the Ferrari, I think, was rated around 3.4, 3.3 seconds, 0 to 60. So right there, the two are really close. When you get to the quarter mile, the Viper is gonna be running a low 11 or a high 10. The 458 was rated at a 10.8. And so from your 0 to your quarter mile, they're pretty dead even. But from there, that's where things are gonna be changing, because the Viper has a rear gear change. So factory had a 307 gear, and mine has been changed to a 355 gear. Now this does great things for getting out of the hole, but you're gonna sacrifice your top end as a result. So this car, I think, rated originally with the 307s, ran 192 miles an hour as the top speed. Well, now with the 355 is probably closer to like 170, 175. Whereas the Ferrari has a top speed of 202 miles an hour. So if you're going at a quarter mile race, they're probably gonna be dead even, but if you're going at a half mile or a mile race, the Ferrari is gonna pull ahead. Now from there, your brakes are completely different between the two cars. I mean, the Viper has a really antiquated brake system. I mean, yes, it's got a 4-piston caliper up front, but it's got a single piston cast iron caliper in the rear and no ABS on top of that. And so the stopping distance is really bad on these cars. And of course, you run into the brake fade with having the smaller brakes. Whereas the Ferrari, on the other hand, has your modern carbon ceramic brakes. And so it stops really well, and you don't have the heat fade that you get that the Viper is going to give you, because it's got a much larger brake rotor. Now, of course, in addition to that, Ferrari has thrown additional tech in there besides having ABS. You've also got this technology in there where when you get off of the throttle to go and get on the brakes, it preloads the calipers to help shorten your distance on your stopping. And so there's a lot of technology thrown into the Ferrari that you just don't have in the Viper. And beyond that, from a technology standpoint, the Viper doesn't have traction control or stability control as well, whereas the Ferrari has both of those. And of course, the interior is completely different between the two. And in my opinion, the interior on the Ferrari is night and day better than it is on the Viper. The interior has been another area of contention for me on the Viper since even before I got it. The very first time I actually rode in one of these, I got in it and I was like, wow, this is not what I expected for a supercar's interior. And I guess that's partly because of the era being from the mid-90s and being a Dodge product versus, say, a Ferrari or Lamborghini or whatever. And so that's something I've always wanted to update on it, but at the same time not wanting to spend that kind of money to go ahead and redo the entire upholstery. Where the Ferrari interior is just absolutely gorgeous. And I love the carbon fiber race seats and the way the steering wheel is designed, having the Manatino on there. Everything is just really well executed and just screams amazing supercar. And it's everything I expect from a Ferrari, and just absolutely love the interior. The outside of the car, this car, I still get compliments on this car looking brand new, and it's a 1996. I mean, this car is 27 years old at this point, and people still say it looks like a brand new car. But then they go and see the interior, and then they're like, oh yeah, it is a 27-year-old car, almost a 30-year-old car. Whereas the Ferrari, the interior is so well thought out that they basically continue to do it with minor changes through the 488, and which went through what, 2020. So This is a really well thought out design that just is gonna stand the test of time.
All right, so we got a break in the weather, so I figured we'll take the Ferrari out for this portion of the video and talk about how the driving style compares between the 458 Italia and my 96 GTS. Now before that, we should mention that I talked about the interior before a bit, but the interior is so much roomier in the 458 compared to the 96 GTS. And a lot of that's because you've got everything from the drivetrain is behind you here. So you don't have to worry about the exhaust running through the side sills or having a giant transmission tunnel here. And so you've got a much more open feel to the design of this interior, which definitely gets rid of the claustrophobic feel you get from the Viper. Now, from the driving perspective, it's effortless in the 458. I mean, it does everything so well and is so finely tuned. Driving it is a piece of cake. Once, of course, you get down the basics on the mechanics with operating the flappy paddles and whatever, but it's not like it's rocket science. It's not insanely difficult to operate this car, and it's just a blast to drive. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy driving my Viper, but it's a lot of work. You need to be paying attention. You need to have both hands on the wheel if you're out driving it, especially if you're driving aggressively, and you need to be really focused and paying a lot of attention, because things get out of hand in a hurry between having the brakes that aren't up to snuff like this is, and not having the traction control and stability control and ABS and all the other nannies that you've got on this car. The Viper is a thoroughbred of a car and commands your respect. And if you don't respect it, you're in for a world of hurt. So it's definitely something to consider, is how they behave very differently. I love both cars, but if I'm gonna have the opportunity to just grab one car for the day, it's probably gonna be the Ferrari. And that's because it just evokes so many different emotions that the Viper doesn't for me anymore. Now, part of that's probably because I've been in the Viper community for over a decade, where I've only been a Ferrari owner for less than 6 months. But at the same time, it's such a visceral experience driving this, with the exhaust note of that flat plane V8 going to 9,000 RPM, and the carbon ceramic brakes just stopping so well, and the throttle response and how linear the power curve is. It's really incredible. One thing that is really nice, at least from my perspective on the driving style on the Ferrari versus the Viper, is the fact that it has less torque than the Viper does. It's not as much of a handful, especially at the lower speeds. And so you can just get on it harder sooner and really go through the gears. Where the Viper, if you just hammer it out of the gate, you're just gonna blow up the tires in smoke, because it's just got more torque than you've got traction. And it's just a balancing act between the two. And so there's definitely less thought process that goes into driving the Ferrari than the Viper does. And sometimes it's nice to be able to just switch things off. And not to say that you don't need to pay attention while driving the Ferrari, because you definitely do. Let's face it, this thing has over 560 horsepower and does a quarter mile in the high 10s. This is a very fast car, but you've got so much assistance from the computers that it makes it easier to go ahead and utilize that power without risking getting into trouble or getting hurt. And that is something I really appreciate about the Ferrari.
That's why this car commands such a higher premium over this one. This car, when it was brand new, was $72,000, which today translates to, I think, like $125,000, $130,000, whereas this car brand new was $288,000. The way this one was optioned today is about $350,000. So it's almost triple the price of what this one is. Yeah, you're gonna get triple the car. And sure, there's definitely a factor in there that you're paying for it being a Ferrari versus being a Dodge. But at the end of the day, you get a lot of car for that money. And it is, in my opinion, it's definitely worth that higher premium. I didn't pay $350,000 for that car. That's just what the inflation adjusted price is. But they're both great cars. They do things completely differently, but they both perform really well. So you want to go ahead and enjoy a Viper, you can go ahead and enjoy a Viper. You want to enjoy a Ferrari, you can enjoy a Ferrari. You want to enjoy them both like I am currently, you can enjoy them both. And it really boils down to what your personal preferences are. But as a comparison, like I said at the beginning, there is no comparison between these two. There's a reason this is a Ferrari and cost triple what this one cost.